Welcome to People Doing Good for Others, where we praise and celebrate and hold in the light those who are truly making significant contributions in our communities. I'm Gary York, and I'm grateful to be with you. We want to thank Wilkes Communications, RiverStreet Productions, and 100.9 WIFM for this opportunity, and thank you again for being a part of our show. My featured guest is Jim Walther. We met several weeks ago at a charity golf tournament out at Oakwoods Country Club. He's a world champion drag racer. His wife, Maxine, and they are wonderful people. I've been to his house to see his collection of trophies and memorabilia. He grew up in Ohio. He came here in the early 90s. And just a wonderful person who has a great story to tell. And again, thank you for being here. And good morning to you, Jim.
Good morning. My pleasure.
It's an honor. And you were taken with racing, and it just got in your blood, and you followed it all the way to the top in 1972.
Well, yes, it all started when I was a young lad, and my daddy was interested in racing. So at a young age, he started taking me around the country to different racetracks and whatever. And in 1955, I went to my first Indianapolis 500, been there numerous times. Over the years, I got to see a lot of different types of racing in the early years. Magazines back then, we had two papers that I could look at. One was the Speed Age magazine, which was kind of the only one that was around, and it covered basically circle track racing. And Chris Economachi's Speed Sport News, which is still going today. Yeah. And those were like it's almost like a Bible to me, you know.
Sure,
as a young kid, yeah. I was so interested in racing, and by the time I was a young teenager, I knew that I was going to be a race car driver somehow, somewhere, some way. And my ambition in those years started out, I thought I would like to drive midgets, sprint cars, and champ cars, as they called them in those days, which is your Indianapolis type cars. That's where my ambition was going towards, and it still was, I guess, for a long time. I built my first hot rod in 1957. I built a very high-powered 50 Oldsmobile. And my first foray to a drag strip was in 1957 at a little place called Howland Corners in Warren, Ohio. And kind of got the bug for the drag strips, but on the streets, we did an awful lot of street racing in those days, which I don't recommend for everybody in this day and age, but back then it was a lot different. And so I did not have the newest car in high school, but I by far had the fastest one.
Well, tell us about that Oldsmobile.
Well, it was of course, a V8, and it was powerful to begin with, and then I kept buying speed equipment for it, and I kept bringing pieces and parts in and putting them in the barn and on the shelves, and Dad would say to me, "What are you wasting your money on that stuff for?" And he kept saying that until I had all the parts I needed. We took the motor out of it, built the motor all up, put it back in.
You did that?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
And I was a very good mechanic. I grew up on a small farm, so you had to, at 9, 10 years old, I was changing equipment on tractors and stuff like that. I was plowing and disking fields when I was 10 years old. So you're operating equipment. If you're operating it, you're going to have to learn how to fix it if something goes wrong. So I was a very good mechanic, and did that. And all the complaining my dad did about spending my money on it, if somebody would come over to the house, the first thing he'd do is go open the hood up and tell them, "Look at what my kid done. Correct. Look what my kid's got," you know. Sure. So, and I was proud of that from my dad, because he's the one that led me into all this now. So
Jim, you also shared with me about the skills of being a great mechanic. Mm-hmm. Talk about that a little bit. Our folks that are watching us today, what does that mean?
Well, to be a good mechanic, you have to visualize what you got to do. You just can't start in ripping something apart, you got to know in your mind. You got to have good mechanical knowledge. You got to see things that aren't visible to you. You got to know what you're going to have to go after and how to do it. So I never dove into something until I took a good look at what I was going to have to do and what it was going to entail. And if it got to be something more than I thought I could do on my own, I would go ask somebody or read and find out how to do it the correct way before I messed something else up. I mean, that was the worst thing you could do when you didn't have any money, was cause yourself to spend more money.
Sure.
So, and I just always had a good presence of mind of what I had to do.
You said you had patience too. You
would, absolutely
plan what you were going to do.
Yes, I had patience. I mean, I guess every mechanic that's ever been around had got into something where he has a part he's trying to get on and it just won't go. Okay, stop a minute, walk away for 2 minutes, come back, grab a hold of it, and you'll put the bolt in that time.
Right.
It's just, you can't get mad, there's things that are very tough to do, things that are easy to do, and I always found mechanical work to be pretty simple for me, pretty easy.
And you also were a crane operator.
Yes, sir.
As a career, a lot of times to make the money to race, but tell us about the skills of being a crane operator.
Well, I'll work toward that a second because
Okay.
it all kind of all fits. I got out of the Army in 1960 and I became a body man. And worked in a body shop, learned that trade. And I worked there from 1960 into 1960 to 1965. And a buddy of mine was a crane operator and he was making more money than me in 40 hours a week than I was making in 48. So I thought, well, we got to do something here. So in the interim, I was also starting to drive race cars, and I had my own race cars. I had already been into top fuel cars. By 65, I'd long been in it, and I was starting to travel more. So when you go to work as an operating engineer or a crane operator, you work out of a hiring hall. In other words, you belong to the union, but when you're in town, you put your out of work in, they will send you out on a job on a crane. If you want to take off and go racing for a week somewhere, or if you're out of town, they call it dragging up. You just drag up, call a halt, tell them you're leaving town. They send another operator out on that crane. When you get back, you put your out of work in, they'll send you somewhere again. So I was able to work all those years, almost all the years I traveled with the top fuel cars. I worked as an operating engineer, and that allowed me to leave town when I wanted to leave town and to make the top dollar when I was in town. So I guess it just kind of had to put everything together to make it work so that I could do what I did.
The excitement of going fast. Tell us, you were there in a 3,500 horsepower, sometimes dangerous. You had great confidence. Just talk about being in the moment, if you will.
It's absolutely an adrenaline rush. I mean, there is no doubt about it. It's like a guy, I guess a guy skydiving gets that same adrenaline rush.
Right.
But when you step on the pedal of that thing on one of those cars, they are so powerful, and you just get thrown back in a seat, and you know it's dangerous. And they might look like they're going straight, but they never do. They're just like this. They're hunting all the way down the track. They don't go straight. And so you got to stay on top of what you're doing, or be ahead of what you're doing. Actually, I guess maybe you could say that you'd want to be a little ahead of you. Anticipate the minute it starts to move, you have to know it. To keep it straight, you got to stay on top of it. So I don't know if there's any better. I don't think for me I could have adrenaline rush any better than all the years I sat in one of those.
Yeah.
It just, you wanted to go fast, you wanted to go quick, and you wanted to beat the guys that you were out there against. Your buddies. There was nothing better than beating your buddies. And I've raced every professional there was in drag racing back then, from the top to the bottom, and I've beaten them and they've beaten me. Right. I mean, it's just, some guys you have a good winning record against, some guys you don't. But you want to beat the best.
Yeah.
So
it's competition. It's it's preparation, it's having great talent. There's just, you had the whole package, you told me when we met.
Well, competition drives you. It makes you want to do better, do more. And that being said, you work harder to try to earn more money to do what you're doing so you can have better equipment, so that being driven goes all the way down the line. I mean, that just does it. And I was fortunate enough to...
Is it money by speed? Is that what I've read 1,000 times? Is that
Not
that
when I
part of it?
Not when I race money. Well, no, not in those days. It does now.
Yeah, right.
I mean, now you can go buy every part for a top fuel car right now that's out there, and it's not the pieces, it's the guy that's doing the tuning on it. Not even a driver anymore. It's the guy that's doing the tuning on it. In the clutch department, that's where it's all at, right in the clutch. How you make it slide and aggressively hook up to the racetrack.
One of the main lessons I learned from you was, you call it engine or motor? Is it an engine?
Well, it's an engine,
Okay.
actually.
And
A motor's an electric motor, yeah.
It was in front of you.
Yes.
And when you went on down years later, it became behind you.
Correct.
Tell us about that.
Well, the front motored cars is how they started out back in the early 50s.
And your championship was the front?
No, my championship was the first back motored car.
Okay.
In 1972, I was the first world champion for National Hot Rod Association with a back motored car. But I drove the front motored cars from 1961 to 1972.
Gotcha.
But I started out, my race cars weren't the best in the country by no means, but by the time I got done with the front motor cars, I had as good a top motored or front motored car as there was in the business. There was no better. There was a lot as good, but they weren't any better than mine, and I wasn't any better than theirs. But it was very good. Back then, a driver had a lot to do with it, way more than a driver does now.
Oh.
First off, all the racetracks you have out there today are prepared. They're very sticky. You couldn't walk across that track with a pair of sneakers on or loafers or flip-flops or something. They'd come right off your feet. You better have tie shoes on to even walk across the track. You could equate it to flypaper, I guess. It's like that. It's that sticky.
Yeah.
Back in all my years of racing, and I last drove in 1978, you started out with just like an asphalt street right out in the road in front of your house or whatever, and you just kept putting rubber down from your own tires, and the longer the meet went on, the better the traction got because the rubber went out further. And we started doing burnouts, as they call them, in 1968 to put rubber down.
Yeah.
That was the sole purpose of it, to put rubber down.
Burnout.
You burn out. You back up into your own tire tracks so that you left with some rubber to leave on.
Oh.
That's how that all started.
Yeah.
And but back to driving the front motored cars. First off, I guess you had to be a very good driver. You had to have good eyesight. Eyesight to me was a big thing. And almost all race car drivers that I know of have good eyesight, that have been really good race car drivers. Everybody. It's kind of a common knowledge. It would be at circle track, be it drag racing, don't make any difference. You got to have good eyesight. And that is one of the things that help you. It helps you on the Christmas tree when you're leaving. Starting when you're staging and you're leaving, your reaction's got to be good. But
Tell us about the tree. Just folks that might not understand.
Okay, a Christmas tree, if they're watching it on TV, you got two little yellow bulbs on top, one for your lane and one for the other fellow's lane. The first one that comes on, you're called pre-stage. Okay, after you're both in on the pre-stage, then one guy will go in and turn the next light on, and then you'll turn that on. That's about, I think it's either 10 or 12 inches. I'm not sure what it is right now. It might be different now. But it's no more than that. It might be 8 inches. But it's between the pre-stage and the stage as you're rolling your front tire in. Now, when both of those lights come on, you got both of them on, they got both of them on. Somewhere between 1/10 and 7/10 of a second after that, the yellow light will come on, and then it goes green. And it's 4/10 of a second between the yellow and the green. So
that's where the great talent kicks in?
Yes.
And the eyesight?
It used to be a 5/10 of a second tree, and I could red light a 5/10 tree every time. I can't red light, or I couldn't. Now it might take me a second to get off the start line now. But back then, 4/10 of a second, they changed it from 5 to 4, and a 4/10 of a second on the tree between the time yellow to green, you have to anticipate it to red light it.
Right.
The guys that are really good, they'll get down there and maybe they'll leave in 4/10 of a second, 3/10 of a second. You'll see their time, reaction times, but you almost have to anticipate to red light. Nobody's.
One other question in my preparation, the will to win. I want you to go through that again and tell how important that is. It's building the car, the safe car, all the things, but that will to win drove you to the top or helped you.
Well,
is that right?
Yes, exactly right. I mean, and then back to being driven before by racing, and I wanted to not only wanted to beat the other guy. I wanted to win, and I wanted to win every time I left the house. I never left the house going to a racetrack thinking I couldn't win. I wanted to win, and I have been very fortunate in my life to have won more than
confidence.
More than my share. I had confidence in myself, sure.
Yeah.
I was never to the point of being cocky about it. Not like that, but I knew that. I don't care who I drove against, I was as good as they were in my own mind.
Did most of the guys and women back then prep their cars, or were you kind of an anomaly? You built them and drove them and owned them and all of that?
Well, there was a few California guys that were always drove somebody else's car that had the best equipment there was from the big manufacturers out there, would do it, like Don Prudhomme with Keith Black and Keith Black Racing Engines. He drove Black's car, and so those, they had unlimited motors and stuff. Most guys like me, you had one motor. You didn't carry a trailer full of motors with you. You had one motor, so you had to prepare it all week long to be able to race it all weekend without hurting it. Because if you broke, you go home. If you broke bad, you went home.
Yeah.
Now, not just having all the parts correct in it, but you had to be able to tune it. Running nitromethane that we ran,
right?
Not gasoline, nitromethane, and you run about 96%, 97% nitro. Little mistake and you can melt everything right now. Then you're all done. So it's like having a bomb with a 6-second fuse on it. You didn't want to make it 5.5 seconds because it's going to blow up, but make it 6.5 seconds, you waited too long to make it go good. So there's a fine line in there, but you didn't want to hurt stuff, and I couldn't afford to hurt stuff, so it made me a smarter tuner by not doing that, and by not breaking my stuff, I guess.
Jim,
I'm trying to say.
Jim Walther's a new friend, and I've just really developed a significant appreciation for your passion for doing things the right way.
Mm-hmm.
You also shared that weekend or that day that the 5 runs, and you were the champion of the world, 1972, Top Fuel.
Yes, sir.
National Hot Rod Association. Share with us that day.
Well, to work up to that day, you won a championship. It happened to be in Amarillo, Texas, was where the race was. But they were going to take 32 race cars, 16 from the western side of the country and 16 from the eastern side. But you had to run up to that. You had to run all their national events, and as they call it for NHRA, their points meets. You had to run a points meet, all the points meets in your division, and 1 points meet out of your division. I was in Division 3, being Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, up that way, Kentucky. But then Division 2 was down here, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia. So I'd have to come down this way somewhere and run a points meet here. But then, after you accumulated all the points that you could accumulate at those races, then you got an invitation written invitation from National Hot Rod Association to be one of the 16 cars representing the East Coast.
Okay.
And same from the West Coast.
Yep.
It happened all over the country. So then we all went to Amarillo. Then you'd have to qualify. And where you qualified in that 32-car show is where you wound up. And 32-car show would be 5 rounds of racing.
5 rounds.
And
You had to win
had to win all 5 of them. And I run some of the best race cars in the country that same day to win it. I mean, there was no gimmies. I unloaded off the trailer and broke the track record when I got there in 1972 with the back-motored car. But I'd run awful good there, did the same thing in 71, and I broke in the 4th round, broke a rear end about half track, and I was ahead of the guy, and he wound up winning it. So, in my own mind, I could have been world champion 2 years in a row if I hadn't broke that rear end.
Right.
But it didn't happen that way.
Right.
But it was 5 hard rounds of racing, 4 qualifying passes, and 5 rounds. So in 3 days, I made 9 hard runs with that thing and never broke a motor part.
Wow.
So, but that was all
Tell us
preparation
about
before I got there.
the last race. Can you remember the guy?
Yeah, who I beat for the final round? Yeah, I beat Clayton Harris. He's from, I think, down Alabama.
Yeah.
Very good racer. In fact of the matter, he had in 1971, not on every occasion, but he had probably the fastest or the quickest car in the country, but he broke a lot.
Broke a lot.
So we went down on the last run. I left the starting line ahead of him, went out ahead of him, and I got down about the 1,000-foot mark, and I blew the clutch in my car, actually, and it knocked a hunk out the side and caught the left rear tire and flattened the tire and liner, and I'm at about 200 miles an hour with a flat left rear tire, and car's trying to spin to my left, and I'm looking, and he ain't alongside of me yet. I had my hand on the chute release and the other hand on the steering wheel, and I got it back straight, and I looked again, he still wasn't there, and it would come once more. I came back, knocked the chute out. He didn't go by me, and I'm wondering what happened to him. Well, he had broke way back down the track, and I didn't know that, though.
That was the final run.
That was the final run. So I actually went across the finish line with a blown left rear tire and a blown clutch. So I got lucky too. He broke. If he hadn't broke first, he'd probably gone by me.
You also shared, and folks watching us today, Hemi. What does that mean?
Well, a Chrysler Hemi has a hemispherical combustion chamber, and which is like the top half of a ball. And when a piston comes up in it, it just gives a very good flame travel. And nitromethane loves a hemispherical combustion chamber.
Okay.
It just is so efficient. Every motor that's out there today in drag racing is a copy of the early Chrysler Hemi.
All right.
And the blocks are about the same shape as the late model Hemi that as they call it, that came out in 1964. So there was the early model and a late model, but we got new Hemis today, but they're nothing like them.
Okay.
But every part is a replication of that original Hemi motor, though.
Jim Walther, a resident of this community and a tremendous advocate, and I met you at a charity golf tournament, and I'm so happy that someone would introduce you as a world champion, and you know, I get this experience today. I love the story about when drivers are standing around getting ready to get started, and you said if 30 guys all had a chance to drive a car, that they'd all pick yours.
Yes,
Tell us about that.
Well, we were at Gainesville, Florida for the turkey trots. I believe this was 1971. And I don't know, there might have been 30, 35, 40 cars in staging lanes, all top fuel cars. And we're all lined up ready to qualify. And I had walked back to my trailer to get something, and I come back, and they're all sitting around the front of the staging lanes. Everybody's on the ground sitting around. And I walked up and I said, boy, the first liar here wouldn't have a chance. And they're joking. And Preston Davis from Memphis, who drove the Tennessee Boll Weevil car, he says, well, you'd be surprised what we're talking about. And I goes, what's that? And he said, we're all sitting here wondering whose car in the staging lanes we would any one of us would get in and make a run in that car without
And trust it.
and not worry about anything being wrong. I said, boy, that's interesting. And he says, well, guess whose car we figured on? I said, I don't know. He said, yours. And that was probably
What an honor.
that was that was but 30 of my peers sitting there, and to have them say that to me was one of the biggest honors I've ever gotten in drag racing. And there's no trophy goes with it. That's just what somebody said.
Yeah.
And that meant so much to me that day. You're like walking on a cloud when somebody
That'll
tells
carry you through life.
Yes.
That moment of saying, we would jump in your car knowing we wouldn't get hurt, we'd had a chance to win, and that, wow. Now, a couple of observations I've made in these few weeks. Your home is spotless. Everything around is, and you said your shop was that way when you were building. What does that mean?
Well, when you're a mechanic and you're doing a lot of mechanical work, if you use tools a lot and you have to go find a tool, if you put it away from the time before, you know where it's at this time. And I couldn't waste time having to hunt for tools. I could walk to any of the toolboxes and get the tool I need for the job I was going to do without thinking twice. It went back in the same spot, the same drawer every time. It was cleaned off, wiped off, put away. And I'm not a fanatic about it, but that just made it easier for me to work on. I didn't have to walk over clutter. I've never been a pack rat on things. If I wasn't using it, I've give more stuff away in my life
Right.
that had to do with racing that you could shake a stick at because I no longer used it and somebody else needed it.
Yep.
Take it.
Jim Walther, your career after racing. Tell us, you've done some really wonderful things involved in repping for Pistons and whatever. Tell us about what you've been able to do.
I quit driving at the end of '98, and I didn't know what I wanted to do really. I was a crane operator, but I lived east of Cleveland about 35 miles, right about 4 miles from Lake Erie, and sitting in a crane in northeast Ohio in the wintertime, it is as much fun as it sounds like.
Right.
It might be today because they all got heaters in them, but they didn't have heaters in them back then, and they were all open. But I was almost 40 years old, and I goes, okay, what are you going to do now? So next town over from where I lived was Wiseco Piston, and I knew the guys. I rode snowmobile with them in the wintertime. And one day the one guy run into my wife, and he says, tell Jim to call me. I got something in mind. So she come home and told me, and I kind of passed it off. And a couple weeks later, he called. When are you going to come and see me? Well, I went over there. They wanted to start an automotive end of Wiseco Piston. So I accepted. I didn't know whether it was going to work out or not. I just took a withdrawal from the Union Hall and kept my book. I could always go back running crane, you know.
Yeah.
So I went over there and tried it. That would have been the end of '81, I guess. And they hired myself and 2 other guys at the same time. One was an engineer, and the other was a designer. And they'd been in business for 40 years, and they had about 54 employees. But it was a good company, family-owned company. Well, we all kind of pitched in and got together. Well, 10 years later, there was 250 employees, and they were making
sales. You were out in the
I was automotive sales manager, run the automotive end, started it. It didn't have anything. And what we did was, I didn't work there very long until I went to one of the owners, and I said, we got a problem here. I said, we can't make 8 pistons the same. That's all right for the motorcycle guys with single cylinders and go-karts and that stuff, but that's not going to work here. So we went out and looked at things, and that started the CNC equipment. And within, I'm going to say they were very, very good about this. We loaded that place, they loaded that place up with CNC equipment. And now we were going from making 2,500 pistons a week, to 5,000 pistons a week.
Yeah. So that was a
short period of time.
Tremendous part of being grateful and proud of the things you were able to do. we want to thank again Wilkes Communications and RiverStreet and WIFM. Close with how your life has been touched in a special way for the opportunity and how you were able to capitalize on it.
I'm a very lucky person. I was born, I guess, with some abilities, and was able to put them to good use. I married a woman who I've been married to for 55 years that went through everything with me and
supported you all the way.
Supported me all the way, and I had 3 wonderful kids. I worked hard to accomplish what I accomplished. Nothing was ever given to me. I'm so grateful that I was able to do it. I mean, I wouldn't change it for anything. I got to do what a million other guys would have wanted to do.
And blessed in countless ways, and
Yes,
had
sir.
great joy, and your life was
And still do.
still do. I can tell that. You're a wonderful man, and I'm grateful you're here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary, for inviting me here. I appreciate this very much.